Great. So this this session we're going to be going over the gambler's conundrum. Holly, did you come up with this phrase?
I did. That's
Okay.
all me.
I know I tried to find more research on it, and the gambler's fallacy was all that was coming up, and I was like, oh, I think this might be Polly's thing. Uh
I mean,
so
you have to give it to, to Kenny Rogers. He came up with like a great way to describe, something that nonprofit sector deals with, and he just didn't know it.
yeah, for sure. I had a good start. But yeah, thank you all for joining another Fundraising Friday. Really excited to go over this topic today. This is the full and complete progressive multiplier team. We hired two new folks, one of whom is on the call with us right now, Valeria, who I know is in a semi-loud coffee shop. So, Valeria, if you want to say hi, you can, or just pop it in the chat. Okay, great. And a little bit about Progressive Multiplier and what we do. As a refresher, we help organizations build a progressive movement of by and for everyday people. We do this work by organizing and leveraging funding to create on-ramps for progressive organizations to start, strengthen, or scale individual giving and earned revenue programs. And through both an online community of practice, which y'all are part of, and our grant making and support program, we build the progressive sector's revenue generation knowledge and skills so that it can amplify a people-powered movement. These are our three main focus areas of work: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. Our goal is to really build up the capacity of organizations that exist in these three focus areas that will be able to have the widespread change that we view is necessary to create a new progressive society. Great. And shout out to our amazing partners at Resilience Initiative who have been putting on these Fundraising Friday sessions. Very appreciative for them. For the folks who are here, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with name and role and what org you're coming from. And yeah, we will dive in a little bit deeper. So what is available through this partnership is these fundraising Friday sessions, as well as one-on-one fundraising coaching with Polly, myself, Valeria, or other members of our team. Please feel free to sign up for the one-on-one coaching sessions. You get up to 5 hours of individual coaching and consulting. It can be topics that we're covering through the Fundraising Friday sessions, or it could be something a little bit more pertinent to your organization in and of itself. There are some examples there on the slide of some work that we've done in previous work sessions, and we would love to be able to help support your org in all that you do. So I'm going to give me 1 second. I will put that link in the chat for y'all so that you can sign up. And you can also just email one of us as well. And we're happy to facilitate that. That link should work. Um, yeah, so Fundraising Fridays is an ongoing session. If you've missed past sessions, this may be super relevant to you, this particular one, and you want to either revisit it for some more knowledge or share with folks on your team or outside of it, please feel free to stop by our YouTube channel where all of the sessions are uploaded. Great. So for the Gambler's Conundrum, what we're going to cover today is what it is exactly, um, and when to do or make three pertinent decisions for your organization, when to hold, when to fold, and when to merge. And we wanted to leave some space for Q&A at the end, so we can talk a little bit deeper about how this might relate to your org and or the work that you're doing. So what is the gambler's conundrum? We're going to be going over how you want to play your odds and how you want to know how to read what's going on around you. Um, so talking about, like, where we are and where we exist in this current, economic political climate, as nonprofits in this kind of, you know, kind of wedged between a lot of different internal and external factors, some of which we have control over and some of which we don't. So the gambler's conundrum is essentially knowing from a bird's eye view where you are in this environment, and what your next move should be to remain in the game, to remain effective. You know, if you've ever played cards of any game or have seen folks who play cards, it's not necessarily just about the hand that you're dealt right now, but what's happened in the past and how that can help you inform what's going to happen in the future. So being able to look at predictive trends, to think through deeply where you are, what potentially is happening, and where everybody else who's in the game is as well. And so a lot of this really just boils down to being able to look at the data that you have, both analytical and anecdotal data that you have at your disposal, and being able to make informed decisions about the health and strength of your organization and what your strategies are and how you want to move going forward. So would love to open it up to you all just to learn. Good morning, Kirsten. Learn from you all as far as like planning for your organization. How far ahead do you plan, and how far back do you analyze the information of what's going on, especially as it relates to fundraising? Does your organization invest in maybe a 3 to 5 year plan that can help give you some of these analytical benchmarks of where you're trying to go? Or are you operating more on a year by year, budget by budget basis? And Polly, I would love if you have other deeper explanations for your thought model. Would love your expertise here as well.
No worries. So the thing that in this sort of vein of like, how far out do you plan your income? I know that that can be a like a difficult thing for some organizations. Like multi-year planning is, like there's just too many factors, so some folks just really struggle with that. So sometimes a cliff comes up on us fast. Sometimes we see it, a year in advance because our funder, maybe one of our biggest funders, said we're sunsetting next year. This is your heads up to get yourself prepared, or something like that. Those are real conversations that we are having with with our grantees right now. And the my thinking about this was really about like um sort of understanding the seas ahead. Like when do we get nervous? What are the things that we need to look at, that when we're looking at the future, like, is that really a cliff or is it just a bump in a road? Is it real money issues or is it my money issues? Like, I get anxious if we don't have more of a cushion. So I'd love to hear, like, in addition to like how the Kafili's questions about how far back do you plan, or how far back do you look, or far forward do you plan, how this sort of resonates with you. And like when you what are the things that make you start to feel like, oh shit. And has anyone ever been in a situation where they had to have this conversation internally?
Michelle is in the chat and said we're planning 1 year at a time right now. Michelle, could you just speak a little bit more about like what your planning organizationally looks like and how you frame all of that?
Sure. I don't know for the best example because we're figuring it out right now, where we've grown a lot over the past few years. So, and we're kind of at the end of our most recent strategic plan. So over the next several months, we're doing work planning right now for 2024, but then we're going to be doing like strategic planning and like an organizational assessment and kind of like several layers of planning. So it might change. I kind of hope that we'll be able to look further out once we've done that, but right now we're just, yeah, kind of taking it one step at a time.
Gotcha. And ultimately, is the goal for like all of these different planning structures to speak to and inform each other, or are they kind of viewed as, separate parts of a larger story?
Yeah, I think they're definitely speaking to and inform and happening concurrently, and yeah.
Right. Thanks. Anyone else sharing? And how like budgeting works for your organization, um, or anything that you look at when you try and set up your budget for the next year, couple years.
I'd also love to hear, like, do you guys have reserves? And if you have reserves, how deep do they go? Are they like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year? Haven't done it yet and are thinking about it. I know there's only two of you, so Michelle or Gina, have any comments on that?
Kirsten is here too.
Oh, there. Oh, so my bad. Right there in the chat. Sorry. And Kirsten. Oh, there's more. I was scrolling. I'm so sorry. Hey, Nicole. Please jump in. We'll let y'all limber up your brains before keep it moving. How's that?
Right. So let's talk about like what moment we're actually in right now and how it affects your decision making as an organization. Um, I can say as a millennial, I am quite tired of living through unprecedented events. I feel like my entire life has been a series of unprecedented events after each other. But in reality, there have been incredible existential crises that have been happening simultaneously. Um, whether you're looking at if you're an organization that is focused on, I mean, pick your choice, right? It could be a social issue. We could be talking about the arts and the lack of the arts here in as far as investment in American society. You could be talking about restoring democracy. You could be talking about the environment and climate change. All of these things are happening simultaneously. Obviously, we've seen a lot of these have decade-long fights, but it feels like culturally that we're at a tipping point in a lot of these focus areas. And so people are also more informed and more engaged with a lot of these issues than they ever have been before, whether it's through media or through social media or just general conversation. And in this current economic climate, folks feel like they're struggling or not keeping up. Inflation is crushing a lot of people's ability not only to provide for themselves, but also to give. So being able to be a part of the donor base of organizations like ourselves. Climate disasters are happening everywhere all at once this summer, it feels like. And politicians arguably are not meeting the moment, regardless of who your politicians of choice or political party is. And it feels like a fever pitch can be building. So how do you as an organization try and stand out and make people focus on you and what you want to be working on and cut through a lot of that noise? And how do you keep eyes on you in this environment of almost sensory overload and information overload? Also saw Gina responded in the chat about planning year by year and having a 12-month reserve, which is awesome. Would you mind explaining maybe a little bit about the decision making behind, um, you know, why create a reserve, why 12 months if that was like a determined goal, and maybe some of the flexibility it's offered your organization? Actually, now after rereading Gina's message, I don't know if Gina can come off mic because they have a colleague also in a meeting, so it might be sharing space. But Gina, if you can type out your answer or come off mute, would love to hear a little bit more about that. But yeah, I would love to hear from other folks about messaging and especially around individual giving and how you're connecting with your donors, with so many different things potentially grabbing their attention as far as philanthropy and giving goes.
I also think there's an important sort of a thing, like a caution here too. I've definitely been in conversations at other unprecedented times where it was like nonstop financial, tragedy after another. Um, but things can feel like a crisis when they aren't. And sometimes, I've certainly been in the position where I've had the executive director walk into my office and be like, hair on fire, things are terrible. And I, like we need you to hustle as much as possible because, the end is nigh. And then we'll, like breathe, have like a bigger conversation. And, I find out like, okay, we lost, she found out that we lost a funder, but because she did, she didn't remember that we have this bigger picture and we've got all the stuff in the pipeline, that losing that funder didn't have to be scary. Knowing is awesome. Knowing that it's going to happen gives you time to hustle and change some strategies. So, the other part in my mind of this conversation is like knowing when the danger is real and when you're doing, especially when you're doing that like internal, thinking, that navel gazing, like, um, is it my anxiety? Is it me like that just in my relationship with money that I'm freaking out? Or is it like, is this a real thing? Hey, Gina, I appreciate you answering that in the chat. Um, yeah, I can imagine that sometimes like these reserve goals just or these reserve dollars just sort of happen. Sometimes very deliberately, sometimes they just sort of start. There's a goal of like putting away X dollar amount every year, and then all of a sudden you realize you've got a year or 2 years worth of money in the bank, and you're like, whoa, wait, is this the prudent thing to do? Um, but like I think that especially during COVID and how um and the um racial justice summer where folks were really starting to put like make lots of rage giving, and also lots of organizations that weren't working on racial justice lost funding. um Having that reserve in the bank makes it easier to deal with when those funders go away, whether it's temporary or because they've just made a giant pivot.
Yeah, I think going forward, it's definitely when you kind of, I guess I would say, not necessarily luck into, but come into this windfall, how best to invest that in the organizational health going forward and roll that into a more strategic plan, when to hold on to that, and also like when to use it. I know so many organizations who are have rainy day funds that they've built tediously over years. And instead of using the rainy day funds during moments of crisis, they'd rather make large scale cuts to the organization. And I'm like, well, if now is not the time for the rainy day fund, like what do you deem to be a rainy day? Um, so those conversations are also very real too.
Yeah, hashtag facts. I can't tell you how often in my consulting career I've literally looked at a board or executive director both and said, like, it's a rainy day fund, y'all. It's raining. Like What are you holding on to this money so that you can, wind down? And like, what's the point of it if it's not to bail you out in this sort of difficult time?
Right. So let's talk about just shifting priorities. Like, we've kind of covered this data point before, but U.S. philanthropy is down of $17 billion dollars in 2022, and the 2023 numbers aren't out yet, but anecdotally from the groups that I'm working with, not looking so hot in 2023 as well. The pandemic, and also just kind of the social reckoning that we've dealt with in America over the past couple of years has increased giving very sharply from like 2021 to 2022. And then we're seeing kind of like a reverse of that. In some areas, almost a whiplash of that. To what levels were prior to that moment, and in some cases below that. And also donor fatigue is super real, both with folks dollars stretching much less than they did even a year or two ago, and also just again the emotional effort that it takes to be constantly engaging. To Kirsten's point, media focus on either on economic uncertainty, or social and political stress or time in our country, has people just feeling a lot of anxiety around the giving. But I'm interested to know, because we're heading into Q3 now, and so the rubber is really meeting the road. Now that you've had a chance to like really go through a lot of the months of the year, how has giving, especially on the individual side, gone for your organizations? And have you been able to keep up with your projections as originally planned?
So Gina, I saw in the chat that you said that you're reaching out to your individual donors. Is that in response to anything in particular? Is it related to sort of this Q3 issue? And I know that Kirsten's mic is down, so she can't talk either. So, anybody who does have a mic and wants to talk, please do.
Hi, this is Nicole.
Hey.
Hi. Hey, yeah, sorry I was in a space and I couldn't speak earlier, but everything you all are saying is like spot on. At Michigan Voices and in Michigan, last year was very hectic. There was a lot of rage giving. As you all know, we fought to help protect reproductive justice rights, and Proposal 2 and quite a few other things that flipped the legislation. And so we were quite busy. But on the flip side, it's been really hard to have the same donors across and foundations across the nation realize the work didn't stop, that we still have access issues and injustice issues with reproductive justice and access and inequality, but across the board in so many different other social justice issues. And so it's been really hard to really shift our priorities to letting people know we're still in the fight, but we have more leadway, like we have a lot more to do. So when you are talking about basically like how are you trying to like make yourselves different, we're storytelling, like we're trying to get above and around some of the misconceptions and just really highlighting the people who have been like boots to the ground for like decades, like trying to make like a real like person approach to it. Because we know that people are, burnt out a lot of, it's going to be the end of the world. Like when you said being a millennial, I am one. So when I heard him say that, I was like, that is so true. So how do we, pull people in? And so when I came in right before our election last year. So I was building the program up from scratch. And so, at first we were year to year, but now we're really shifting to 3 to 5 year as far as planning. And we have had some reproductive justice foundations who have tapped out, saying that they wanted to go to states that had more of the abortion restrictions. And so it was good, like you said, for them to let us know. And then it was also good for me to tap in with our executive director and just say, you know, this is what we need to be doing, because it's a different ball game when you're raising money and catching money. And so we just had to strategically, you know, put things in place so that we can not even think about how we're doing, you know, projections for this year, but for next year. So, I mean, I'm on target, but it's just going so much slower. Like, it's slower getting the ask, it's slower getting the agreement, it's slower getting everything this year. And it's quite frustrating, but I get it. And I'm just trying to find different ways, like funder briefings and different ways to just keep people engaged. I just wanted to, you know, say that and just thank you so much for this space. Because just being in development, it can be very siloing at times, So I really appreciate the space.
I'm really curious about what you said. I mean, I've certainly, we've been hearing the same thing about in the repro space, but not only that, some of the big funders are pivoting, and it just is mind-boggling why the pivot is happening now. But also the slow fundraising that you're experiencing after what I can imagine was a little bit of like a lottery win last year, when all of the rage giving happened after Roe fell, or Roe was beat up and taken down. So I'm curious about how did you have you changed up any of your tactics on with those I'm reading and talking on those surge donors that you had, those rage donors that you had. Have you tried to change up tactics to keep them engaged, or are you seeing them stick around, or were they hard to hold on to?
I'm seeing them stick around, because what we did was we consulted with a communications team, and they've been trying to really push us to the front. We were always in the back saying, no, it's our partners, because we're a state table. We have 105 table partners. So we've always kind of hid in the back out of respect. And I've been a long time organizer before I became a development director. And so I just was really, like, oh, okay, we want to highlight our partners. It's like, yes, you should, but you should also highlight the work that you all did around the different campaigns, like all the different things that you've done throughout the state. And so what we did was, to our funders, we literally broke down exactly our impact, and we told the stories. And I realized that in the donor calls, it really mattered, because it wasn't being spoken about in media. Like, we would be mentioned that we were part of a collaborative, but that was it. So my tactics are more like, again, like the pictures, the people, the stories, and just like letting them know, and not even just the stories of the people doing it, but the stories of the people who still don't have access. Right above Saginaw, we still don't have abortion, services that can help individuals. So just like letting them know in real time, but not the scarcity that or a tragedy or trauma lens, but just more of a, like, we need to continue this work, and then we have 2024. So this is what we have to do. And there's no off years, because we actually have to keep the momentum going. We have to keep these same people who help protect our democracy. We have to keep them employed. So not only am I telling the stories, but I'm also like telling them, like, this is why we need to do this, and this is where we're continuing to face. So I'm doing more of like a ask, and like personalizing it, and really just showing the projection of where we could go if we have to fire all these people and start over again. Like, it's just silly, and it's not, feasible. So I've only had 2 repro foundations say no, but the rest of our folks have stayed on after we've done a lot of the communication and stuff like that.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I'm working with a repo group right now that is going through the same thing. And part of the work that we do in like really reinforcing how important independent revenue generation is that, you know, I'm seeing all of these giant foundations doing these like big sweeping, you know, strategic realignments and organizational realignments ahead of, frankly, what I think is ahead of the election cycle. And, you know, at pivotal moments in other campaigns, like it feels like when we're needed the most or we're having the most demand, getting kneecapped a little bit from a funding perspective. So being able to just diversify where you're getting your revenue from is definitely helpful, but also doing those deeper stewardship touches and letting folks know that they are still needed in the space and that, you know, the fight isn't over or hasn't been won, I think is very great framing.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And like, I think it's, so some of these you know, these strategies or the way that you're communicating specifically, are like all the tools that we keep in our tool bags, that become hella handy in a crisis. You know, like if the relationship building through storytelling, through not trying to trauma bond with people, but actually being, like doing it in a like, we can do this kind of a way, I think is really, it's a good tech to take now. One, because we should unlearn those bad practices in general, but like, should those dominoes keep falling, I'm really hoping and praying that doesn't happen in the repro space. But should those dominoes keep falling, you've got your messaging on point already, and you know that you can hustle and try to, in your effort to get new donors with your donor briefings or funder briefings, and reaching out to probably even individual donors because you've got your messaging on lock, that it might make it easier to pull yourselves out of a free fall if that was a need, if that presented itself.
Right. So as we said before, the Gambler's conundrum is essentially figuring out, whether you're going to continue on your course as an organization, but having a couple other options as well. So whether you are going to fold or potentially like close your doors, or whether you may merge or be acquired or acquire another organization as well. And so how you choose really comes down to what is being brought to the table. So there are different assets and experience beyond just the financial health or, or the people that your organization has, that really can be determining factors in what may make sense for either your org, or if you're looking to potentially bring in another org into yours. So some of those things include really strong programming. So whether it's innovative ideas or a model that just really works, that has people engaged and is providing positive outcomes. A strong brand name recognition with an organization is a huge one, especially if you're working within a specific community or geographic area. Those are things that being well known in that area will definitely help, or be an asset in that decision making, as well as historical relevance. So if you've been around for a while, if you're a legacy organization that has had some big wins or things that you can point to, once you've become quote unquote institutionalized within a community, maybe that's the brand that would want to have the name on the front of the door, whether you do a merger or an acquisition. Having robust systems as well. So the infrastructure on the back end. So it may be, you are an organization that really wants to develop your systems, and you may have a peer organization that may be potentially smaller, that has like some really great systems intact that they could bring along with them that would help move you along that growth curve a lot faster than trying to implement and make everything yourself. And also an active donor and member base. And I mean this outside of just like the actual donations, because obviously if people were bringing in as much money as they had hoped for, these conversations may not be happening as frequently. But what I mean by active is like folks that are engaged in the process, so actively in the funnel. So not just light touch folks who may know their name or have shown up to one event, but people who are volunteering their time, volunteering their effort, really invested in the programming that the organization is doing. So these are some things to just consider if you were going to make that type of decision. And one thing that I think is really important to highlight, and shout out to Polly for pointing this out, is the difference between mergers and acquisitions as organizations. As nonprofits, like, we don't really think of ourselves in this way oftentimes, about either merging, joining forces, what that looks like. So a merger between two nonprofits would be, both of those organizations create a succession plan that involves them merging into a new organization that, has obviously very strong ties in relation to the previous mission and vision, but may essentially be a whole new organization with some tweaks that involves the resources and potentially the people of both organizations. An acquisition would be usually a larger organization would bring on another organization to do a very specific role or type of work under the larger umbrella. So if you're a direct service organization, this might be creating some wraparound services. So you might do one part of the engagement, and then so another organization may do a different part of work, still supporting that same constituency group. So it's providing more holistic services around what maybe the root causes of whatever focus area you're trying to address are. And in that case, the other 501c3 organization would potentially become fiscally sponsored by the larger organization, or become like a full department within the other organization. Any questions about either of those? The differences or things of that nature before we dive in a little bit deeper?
I can't help myself here, because I'm like, this is something I'm a little bit obsessed with recently, because I've had so many conversations with groups about this issue. So one of the things that I'd like to sort of to also sort of like use as a frame, as an example for how you can join forces with another organization and bring and use like the different assets that you have to bear in different ways. And I'm going to use something from the corporate world, because I think y'all might know the partners or might not be aware of that this happened this way. But many moons ago, Nations Bank and Bank of America were these two separate entities, and they merged. Now, most folks haven't heard of Nations Bank in a really long time, so there's this assumption that Bank of America acquired Nations Bank, but that's not actually what happened. When they came together at the merger table, they, in their like asset sort of discovery conversation, one of the things they realized was that Bank of America had the better brand and had the better, like, overall, like, people just had these really positive feelings about them, but their products sucked. They actually had really terrible customer service, which is wild that they had this better brand and this better like association with their name, where Nations Bank was like way more solid, way more stable, way better customer service, but their brand sort of sucked. So when Nations Bank acquired Bank of America, they made a strategic decision to keep the brand name, but to bring in all of the business assets that they did better. So, so sometimes when you sit down at a table and you're like, all right, we've got a lot we bring to the table here. And, we like, you need to come to that position in a strong place, right? Bank of America was really like applauded, because on some level, this was like a masterful thing that they did, where they were like, yeah, we're going to go away, but the general public isn't going to think that, because we've made our case to you so greatly that our name should be the one that lives in infamy. So on some level, like they got, even though they're shareholders and everybody got the big win because, banks are banks, but like on some level, they got the better win because they knew what they had to offer in this merger when they sat down at the table. So maybe your organization has the best credibility on subject matter. Like you've been doing it forever and you've been doing all this stuff, but you lost a bunch of funders and not enough irons in the fire to sustain you for the future. But you're like, you know what? This other group, we're mission aligned, we're doing a lot of the same things. If we joined forces and they used our credibility together, we could really do a lot more. We don't have to pay for two auditors, we don't have to pay for two finance officers. We don't like our development shops could merge together, so there's savings in just the process of merging or coming together or acquiring. But we can, like up the, the level of game that we bring to the table as when we join forces. And that's I think it's really important to really think about those things when you get to a point where you're like, wow, I need to have this conversation. This isn't you're not asking for a favor. If you've done your asset review and you figured out who you are, what you do, what you bring to the table, and why it's a smart move, it's not a favor. It's a business decision there where everyone can win. And I think that's such an important distinction. I've seen groups come together and was like, one had an awesome organizing arm. The other one had like a really great, like advocacy arm, like legal advocacy, but the other one had like the boots on the ground thing. When they joined forces, they were amazing because now they had the attack the issue from both sides thing, right? The intellectual and the ground. So I think sometimes when the reason why I was really jazzed about wanting to do this conversation is because I think sometimes when organizations get to this place where they're like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, like we've got to, like things are falling apart, that sometimes we make decisions like, let's just hold on, let's just keep fighting, let's just keep trying to go with no irons in the fire. If you got lots of irons in the fire, then you put your hustle plan together, but if you don't have a lot of irons in the fire, if your funding like hella fell apart, then, like you still have something to offer and you still have assets that you can bring to the table. You just have to think strategically and get out of your feels and get into your nonprofits are really great at strategic thinking and looking at problems, but sometimes when it's our own organizations, we get stuck. So, you got to try to like give yourself a moment, feel what you need to feel, but then turn on that part of your brain that attacks problems and find solutions. So, all right, that's mine. I'll probably get it back up on the soapbox again in other slides, but I just had to have that right.
No, I think that's super real, Polly. And I think one thing that we also do too is like beyond just the fields, it's like the attachment to our organization, right? And what that means versus like the work that you're trying to do. So speaking from personal experience, I'm in the process of kind of an acquisition right now, and removing my personal and feelings and attachments to an organization that I built and a brand that I built, thinking deeply about the work that and the reason why I started doing this work, and the potential for scale, and being able to do that work on the level that I would want to do it at, that would take me maybe another 10, 15 years to get to by myself, and building slowly or partnering with with Progressive Multiplier to be able to do that work with organizations at large. So it isn't always like also from a place of deficit or a exit card. It can be a strategic move of growth as well. So let's get into a little bit more about what that decision-making process looks like. So let's talk about, if you're having potentially a rough fundraising year, but you you want to hold? What are some positive signs that like you have the tools that you need to get out of this, right? So now we're taking that bird's eye view that we talked about before and just not even looking at the numbers, just looking at what are our assets that we have for us to be able to, get as close as we can to meeting our fundraising goal, and also setting up situations and systems to prevent that from happening in the future. And the first one is solid leadership. And I want to include that this includes staff and the board. Oftentimes people view leadership as just the executive director or who is quote unquote on the leadership team. No, it is the people who are in charge of decision making and also delegation and making sure that project management is able to be done. That will be the biggest determining factors in whether you're able to accomplish anything. So without leadership, you're pretty screwed. So that to me is the number one thing. And then also pairing that with a clear vision. I know we talked a little bit before about forecasting or having a North Star for your organization. Oftentimes, especially with fundraising, we can get bogged down in, okay, we set a budget, we fundraise to the budget, we set a new budget, we fundraise to that budget, and get caught in that hamster wheel. But having a larger vision of like, okay, what is the organization actually doing, and how does our team as fundraisers resource that work, so the work actually driving what the fundraising is, rather than fundraising or development potentially like framing what the work is. So flipping that relationship and having a better sense of what we're trying to accomplish as an organization will give you more grounding in your fundraising. We've gone over this again. It's the reason why we're all here: diversifying your funding sources, whether that is diversifying your funding sources within one type of funding source, or diversifying the actual types of funding that you pursue. All of us at one point or another have been very lucky and blessed to have a major donor, whether it's institutional, a government grant, an individual, that is incredible, necessary, supportive work for our lifeblood, but we should be building our baseline and not just relying on that money to come in, year out, because then you're not going to be ready on the off chance that it's not going to come in at some point. And we talked a little bit about reserves. That goes hand in hand. Just because you get money in the door doesn't mean you have to spend it right away. Being able to, if you get a windfall at any certain point, be strategic about how you want to use that money. And that's why this plan, having a plan and a vision, is so important. So that you know where you are in your trajectory. Do you need this money to catch up to maybe being behind that 3 to 5 year plan, or are you ahead of or moving at the pace that you want to? And you can save this money, and just in case something goes bad in the following year or the year after that, you have this money waiting for you to make sure that you stay on your plan, right? So we want to have a larger vision that is informing our day-to-day work. Another thing is a culture of adaptability, and being able to adjust on the fly, and for folks to be able to step up and meet the moment. And this is something that is, a culture that needs to be introduced and encouraged and maintained. So this is, even if you're not facing one of these situations today, this is something that you can work on building within your organization, even from a programming perspective of just learning how to adjust on the fly. Working that creative muscle within your organization is really going to help build your people power, so you can rely on your folks during tough times. Having a base of loyal supporters, whether you're an organization that works in the arts and you're a museum that has, a really great member base, or you're an organizing organization in a community, regardless of whether you're facing like organizational tough times, if you can lean on your folks to provide support to your organization during tough times, and have put in the effort and the work to build that base, you have another untapped resource to go back to. So we talked about before, following up with other funders who may have funded you in the past, who have even funded you this year, and said, we're experiencing unprecedented times, and being able to, potentially get some additional support. It's a thing that happens all the time. But being able to see these issues potentially coming, and also having removing the ego from being like, everything is great over here, keep giving us your normal amount, and really just sitting with the transparency of what you're dealing with will help you a long way in that. And that comes down to communication. This is hard stuff to talk about, especially from the fundraising perspective. No one really thinks about fundraising until it's not good. And then all of a sudden, people really feel their jobs are on the line, their livelihoods are on the line, right? There's a lot of inherent pressure that comes with that. So people don't necessarily want to always raise the alarm at the earliest possible stage, freak people out, have people thinking, oh, well, if fundraising is not going good, do I need to go find a new job? But having open and honest, transparent conversation with staff, with the board, with volunteers, will be one of the biggest steps to being able to prevent it from being a position of layoffs, furloughs, things of that nature, because you're bringing people into the process at an early enough stage to be able to work through it together. Oftentimes I feel like as development teams, we put all of that pressure on ourselves, and that we have to solve it. But there are so many solutions and creative things that your team can do to help fundraise for your organization that just probably have never been asked before. And so this is an opportunity to bring them into the fold. So back again, strategic planning, but this time in the short and medium term. So creating a plan for when you're in these tough times, you found out you're facing a deficit for the year, how are you going to get out of that, and being able to actually share that with the stakeholders responsible, and getting them on board with the plan, and having a collaborative mindset, working outside of just your development team and relying on program staff on your board, especially as the fiscal stewards of your organization. This is not something we hide from the board. We have to work with the board to get this done, as difficult as that might be. So rely on them, their experience, their networks to see the org through tough times, and being able to maintain a positive organizational culture through hard times, which is incredibly difficult, but with a solid plan, with solid leadership, you can show that you'll get through it and galvanize your team to be able to work towards your goal. Great. Any questions on that before we jump into when you might want to actually fold and not hold? Okay, great. So we went through our plan, tried our best. The hole is just the hole, right? You have unsolvable fiscal issues. There may be a deficit that is actually going to prevent the organization from completing its mission. There aren't cuts that you can make that do not deteriorate the quality or your effectiveness of your work. That might be a time when you need to think about potential sunsetting of the organization. Another one would be loss of relevance. You're not making an organizational impact across your focus area. And there are other orgs that are, I don't love this phrasing, but like doing the work better, or more effectively, or having greater impact. That might be a time to really consider, like, this might be something that we need to, think about. Another one, governance issues. And these tend to pop up as crisis moments, but have been long seated, oftentimes from the origin of the organization, and building an organizational culture that doesn't have the frameworks to have good governance. This builds up over time. So forms of mismanagement that lead to mistrust and siloing of information and resources, mission creep, whether it's you're doing things from a programmatic standpoint and you have too many things going on, or you're chasing dollars from a fundraising standpoint, and now you have to deliver on all these grants that have you doing 10 disparate things. A board that's absent or not involved, and other management issues can really create enough of a crisis within the organization where it won't be able to function in the future.
I think the board issue is a big one. In my career, I can say that I've worked with hundreds, and that's not an exaggeration, of nonprofits. And I could tell you that I have never seen a great working board with a terribly run organization. I've seen organizations that run well despite of a terrible board that isn't doing their job. But if you've got a really a really good board that knows what governance is and oversight and is doing their job, it's almost impossible for that to align with an organization that isn't doing its job, because it is so integral to good functioning. So if you've got a board that's not functioning well and management issues, it's a recipe for disaster.
Right. So say, because of some of the other issues that we've talked about before, you're not able to deliver services. So the whole mission and reason why you exist, you're not fulfilling your duties as an organization. That is a critical time to think deeply about either sunsetting or merging with another organization. Moments of crises that have caused decreased demand or loss of trust, especially within a community and a marginalized community as well. These are things that are really serious inflection moments for organizations and take a lot of work of harm reparation to get past. So this might be a moment where you have those conversations. Operational inefficiency as well. You know, organizations, I think, always have to push back, especially against institutional sources, but even against individual donors now, about how organizations spend their money. And there is a lot of misinformation out there about, you know, what it takes to run a nonprofit and overhead costs and wanting to quote unquote minimize that, right? But I do think that there is a point where you're not delivering services and you're paying exorbitant salaries for folks who are not delivering services. When you reach that point where a lot of your money is going to potentially personnel or those type of costs, but you're not doing the actual work, that's a sign of a failing organization. And also burnout, you know, both emotional, but also programmatic burnout. Orgs cannot run without the people. They are the fuel. So if your team consistently leaving, you're having like huge amounts of churn in your staffing, folks are burnt out or feeling inefficient, the work is going to suffer. And it might be time to think about potential sunsetting. Right. So let's talk about mergers now. So it's kind of like, you know, getting to know somebody. You got to figure out how you all align, you know, on a deeper level, not just at the surface of like, oh, we do this work and you do this work too. But how you approach the work, having a shared mission and vision, and also geographic focus as well, is a big determining factor of what kind of support that you would be able to provide and what the merger would look like. Would it be a horizontal merger where you know, potentially maybe one group works in New York and another one works in New Jersey, and through that, by merging, they can get a wider spread? Or one group works in New York, another group works in New York and does wraparound services or complementary services to each other, so it would be a vertical merger and you could provide deeper level support for the same constituency. So that's one of the main determining factors. I have financial struggles here, but financial health, you can also merge again in positive financial situations. It doesn't have to be a crisis inflection point all the time. If you're struggling with deficits, even if both organizations are struggling with deficits, if the math works and you have different funders that are supporting, there could be a way to close both of those gaps by merging as organizations. Or if you are in the process of scaling, it may make financial sense for you all to be able to also take that next step up, because then showing scale would open you to a new level of donors and support that would allow you to continue to grow the work. And then again, increase impact. How would your work complement each other? What parts are duplicative and potentially would need to be reframed or cut, but what are supportive of each other and provide a deeper argument for why this should happen and what kind of support you can provide to your constituency. And then also operational efficiency. Again, this can work both ways. You can either save money by creating costs and operating under one operations team, or if your desire is to scale and to grow, now you can have two operations teams with that can be reorganized, that will provide you the organizational support to be able to pursue more work, to work deeper with other clients and to do more robust work, and have that support on the back end. Right. Increase fundraising capacity. This is always a good one because I know as professional fundraisers, we always feel our teams are too small. So, by potentially doubling the size of your fundraising team, you can provide that deeper support and provide targeted solicitation and stewardship. Something that I've heard on these calls all the time is, I'm a one-person shop. Where can I go? How do I start? I don't have the time to do like this deeper level work. You would potentially have that time now because you would have additional folks on your staff to be able to do that targeted, deeper engagement with your donor base. And then also just improving in a competitive landscape. Through mergers, you can grow at scale and have more impact, as we said before, that'll entice other funders and supporters. And so two small fish could be a big fish in a pond. And so thinking with a positive mindset of like what you can accomplish and creating a vision around that is something to definitely think through. Infrastructural improvements, being able to share resources that allow for deeper ties and supporting your organization's operations is another key reason for this. For instance, one org might have really robust bookkeeping and financial statements, and the other one is just like manually important things on QuickBooks themselves, while the other one may, have a full Salesforce or Razor's Edge CRM suite all set up and ready to go, and the other one is, still putting things in on Google Sheets, right? And so because of the mismatch of those assets, each operations team is operating under capacity, but together could have a really robust and healthy organization with minimal additional investment in time, money, and resources, because these are things that have already been built and money that's already been spent. And then also reputation, aligning with another positive organization. If there are two organizations with positive reputation, can do a lot. But also if one of the downfalls that we talked about before about taking a reputational hit, finding an org that is also trusted within that community to ally with you and to merge with you is a way of showing, that your work is valuable to that community and be able to do some of that repairing and rebuilding of trust. Great. So I know we covered a lot of information around this, and we have about 15 minutes. Would love to do a deep dive on any thoughts about this. Is this confusing? Is this relevant to your organization? We can dive in a little bit on any individual situations that we would love to talk about, and use the rest of this time however y'all would like to. And if we don't have a point yet, I would love for Polly, if you'd be interested in explaining like what made you so interested in this, like, the gambler's conundrum in general, and why, you thought it was a great topic to share with groups.
Oh, sure, definitely. So, I've had to deal with this multiple times in my career when I was, especially in my consulting practices, my consulting practice from the 4 days, um, where organizations just, like, did not, see it coming, partly because they, didn't never did the reserve thing and didn't really do deep planning on their budgeting, and they chased money, which then diluted their brand and then made actually money harder to get because funders were just sort of like, oh, you're all over the place, like, I'm out. And then most recently, we've just had a lot of several organizations come with strategic assistance requests that are just in this place of like trying to figure out like how to pull out of a nosedive. For some organizations, the past couple of years were fine, like, because they were in spaces that were still getting a whole lot of attention. But there are other groups that just really lost a lot of attention over the last couple of years, and COVID just really fucked them up. And they're struggling to find a way to hold on. And I've had to have, really big conversations with folks about, are you, why, like, why are you holding on? Like, we looked at the landscape, we looked at the money, we looked at like who, how many irons are in the fire, who the friends are on the list. Like, just, we tried to, like, find every dollar. And it was, I had to have a moment with them to say, if you can start having conversations internally and then externally about merger acquisition, you can keep this organization's legacy alive. But if you decide instead that you're going to spend the money until there's not a penny left, there will be no legacy. Like, you can hustle, you can really try to hustle and find another grant, but without any true leads, how likely is that? And they're just really hard conversations. And at the end of those conversations, in the past and recently, it was like, like, I'm really glad that I could do this looking now, or I knew what to look for, like, like when to identify that cut bait moment. I've also had conversations where folks were panicking, but when we started to look, there was nothing there. It wasn't time to panic. And even, when we were preparing this presentation, one of the points in our internal conversation that I said was like, one organization sees a cliff coming in 8 months. And, Bethany pushed back that, like, 8 months, if you've got a lot of irons in the fire, is fine. That's actually might even be like fantastic. But it really is about the moment, like, what is the situation? If you've got 8 months worth of money and lots of prospects that are like probably going to land, yeah, that's a typical day in the development world. But if you've got 8 months and nothing, we need to have a conversation. So, having had multiple conversations and watching organizations, even from afar, even do big layoffs and surprise folks with these, big statements, to me just said, like, maybe we need to have this conversation because we don't have to get there. And I think your point about communication, Kafili, is really important. I have seen organizations that waited to the last minute before they put out the call, and folks were like, dude, if I knew this 6 months ago, we could have threw you a safety net, or they only announced that they're closing and never put out the call for support. And the same thing happens. If I had only known, we could have helped. So that's why I just seen a lot of it happen. And I do think if you're well prepared and you can think about this ahead of time, a free fall can level out, and you can come out on the other side.
Thanks, Paul.
Mhm.
Kirsten, say your hands up.
Let's see if my mic works now. Does it work? Test, test.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hi, kids. I'm back. I just want to emphasize, I'm so grateful for this topic today because I do think that for folks who are in earlier phases of their development career or people who are organization founders, I just want to emphasize the power of dynamic collaboration and how it doesn't always mean that we've done our job poorly or that we haven't met our mission, that there really is this opportunity. And sometimes growth means merger. And sometimes meeting your long-term goals as an organization, especially when we're doing political work or social justice initiatives, what we're really doing is we're accomplishing our goal. We are moving into a new phase where maybe our organization isn't an independent, strong but mighty little fighting team, but we really have found a way to meet the greater good by collaborating with other people with shared vision. So I've been, as Polly mentioned, for those of us who've experienced that, I think the looking with the lens sometime, like who can we pull into this with us? Who do we, admire that is doing these three things better than us? And how can we like make a bigger impact by being part of the same team? Is really and sometimes an evolutionary step for an organization rather than a fail. So I just wanted to.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate that because I do think that that's an important thing to spotlight. Like the conversations about merger acquisition could also be from a growth perspective. This doesn't have to be only in times of crisis. That's, I think I touched on it, but I think you did it so much better of like these can be really strategic decisions that are mission, vision, value, movement driven decisions. That's why we do coalitions. That's why we do tables. And sometimes, those tables are the perfect place to be like, wait a minute, there's a lot of duplication. If we joined forces, we could eliminate the duplication and do so much more with the resources that we have.
Which is what we're all doing right here today. Yeah. So thank you both.
Thank you. Michelle, see a hand up.
Yeah, hi. I have a question about like if you choose to go down this path and if you've decided to do a merger acquisition or something like that, but you have monthly donors. I'm curious like how, and I realize I'm sure it depends on the organization, but I'm just curious, like, what have other organizations done? Like, do you give the monthly donors, is it ethical to like automatically move them over, or do you give them a chance to opt in to the, whatever the new organization is? I'm just, curious how groups have handled that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I've worked with public television and radio so much that this is in my wheelhouse, if that's okay. So what you do is you have an opportunity to make a really exciting announcement to your community of support, how much further their resources are going to go and the greater impact that they're going to have because of this important step that you're making as an organization. And I believe that it's really about how you communicate it to them, with the assumption that of course they would want to continue to support the mission that they signed on for. It's continuing. In fact, it's making a bigger impact. And rather than giving people the opportunity to opt out as a dirty development person, I would actually give them the opportunity to consider increasing their monthly contribution, because now they're going to be getting so much more impact with their resources. If they want to opt out, they're really good at doing that on their own. And so the assumption is always that they would be thrilled that your work is having a bigger impact. But I don't know, Polly, any input on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that strategy. And I also say that like, it really depends on what the merger, how the merger goes down, right? So like if it's, let's say it's like, just to pick on you, gender justice is a project of, merged to organization. then in that merger discussion, you could be like, hey, we've got some donors who are committed to us. We want to keep these alive and have that just be restricted income to our program part of this relationship. And so like you would basically keep that link alive, that processor alive until all of those, like moved off or ended. You could also put an announcement out to be like, hey, you can keep doing what you're doing with, in this way without changing anything. But if you wanted to move to our bigger umbrella and support the larger work, you can do that. So there's like, I've seen it, go a lot of different ways. If there sometimes just really isn't a need to turn that off. It really just depends on how it's set up. You can, sometimes the way it's set up, where the money gets deposited, you can change it at any time without actually changing up the transaction. So partly it's back end, partly it's how you do the merger. But I, like the conversation whenever I like think about conversations with donors about like, hey, can you resubmit your credit card on this new form because we're changing something, you're always going to lose folks. So my goal is always going to be like, how do I sustain this with little impact on my donors? If there's not a way, there's not a way, and you just got to do your messaging right.
Thanks. That's super helpful.
Yeah. Kafili, have you dealt with this?
Yeah, I would say anytime, to Polly's point, anytime that you make people re-sign up for something or move any of their information, you're going to see an attrition drop. And so your goal is to combine the messaging that Kirsten was talking about, of it being a great opportunity, but B, making that transition as seamless as possible. So if you're working with another org, hopefully y'all are on the same giving platform or similar giving platforms. Oftentimes, if you do that transition, what I've seen from orgs who like switch giving platforms is a lot of the times they can get the recurring giving data and just say, hey, this is going to show up in your credit card statement as XYZ service now. It's the same donation. It is us. We just changed donation services to make it easy for you. So anything that you can do to like really just shorten that process and make it so folks are informed, but don't have to make an actionable step of re-signing up, would be, I think, your best way to go.
Thank you.
And really from a financial standpoint, unless there's like a huge desire to get rid of bank fees, like, if the parent, for lack of a better term, organization has one more chart of account to manage, it's not that it's not that really big of a deal. Most finance people know how to chart multiple accounts because most finance people have to chart multiple accounts. So that's, also a conversation that would happen at that level too. What other questions or thoughts come up? Like, did we miss something? Because, I wouldn't be surprised if we did. Is there anything that didn't, also, if there's anything that didn't land right, we want to push back on? I'd love to hear that too. So we're at time anyway. I really appreciate y'all, the participation. I know it's hard to come to a training on a Friday at the end of the summer, so everybody's all distracted. you know, especially thanks to Kafili for humoring my desire to have this conversation and doing it so well. But I hope that you know this gives you just some context, and I hope that you never have to do this from a position of crisis, but if you do it, it's coming from a position of strength.
100%. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Hope the end of your summer is awesome and amazing. And we will see you on September 8th for activating a grassroots board. Very excited for that topic. It's one that's near and dear to my heart. So looking forward to speaking with you all then.
All right, bye, y'all. Nice to see you.
Bye. Thank you so much. It was
Yeah,
very helpful.
thanks for joining in. We love it when folks join in.
No
Thank you,
problem. See you
Nicole.
on that.
Nicole, you were awesome. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much for your feedback and for your work. I can't wait to continue to collaborate with you all.
Take care,
Awesome.
everybody.
Bye.
Okay, bye.